This review will be based on the web novel version of Full Clearing Another World Under a Goddess with Zero Believers, which is complete, and then I'll do a comparison with the light novel version, which has 4 volumes as of this review. I think it would be proper to give you a warning. This review will probably be full of spoilers, so proceed at your own risk. Takasuki Makoto is a normal high school student and a hardcore RPG player. However, normal goes out of the window when his whole class is involved in a bus crash and they are whisked away to another world. Powerful gods rule this strange new land of magic and monsters, and every newcomer is blessed with strong stats and unique skills. Well, not quite. Makoto's stats turn out to be pathetic, and his skills are super weak compared to his classmates. He is even stuck as an apprentice mage for a long time. What's even worse, that he is given only 10 years to live. Luckily, Makoto soon meets a minor goddess named Noah, who appears in Makoto's dreams and asks him to become her first believer. With the help of Noah's blessings and a divine weapon, Makoto seeks to become strong enough to rescue his goddess from the dungeon where she is being trapped. By training hard and using his weak skills in unorthodox ways, Makoto proves that even when playing on hardcore difficulty, an RPG player always makes it to the end. This is the premise of the web novel and the light novel, Full Clearing Another World Under a Goddess with Zero Believers. Let's start this review with the web novel version first. Takasuki Makoto is the protagonist of the story. He is overall a reasonable teenager who is also a gamer. He may be a bit cleverer than most, and he has a few quirks as well. He is not exactly a loner, but he is just a bit awkward. And somewhere deep down in his heart, he wants to be a hero who fights for justice and saves the world. After being transmigrated to another world, the protagonist finds himself in a temple where the transmigrated beings have to go through a phase of training which will help them survive in this world. And of course, because of the iron rule that the protagonist has to be an underdog, he turns out to be the weakest one amongst all the other worlders with overpowered skills. However, by virtue of his gamer mentality, the protagonist takes his misfortune as a kind of hard mode game difficulty and continues to push forward. He learns what he can and utilizes whatever method that is available to him. He does his best to survive in this harsh world. But things don't stay that way for long. After becoming a believer of the goddess Noah, his stats begin to improve at breakneck speed, like it is for most protagonists. I must agree that the protagonist himself plays a great part in his rise, but there's a good amount of plot armor at play as well. But can't really call that a problem. I mean, what is a fantasy web novel without the plot armor? Makoto himself is pretty dense, but he becomes super dense after getting the skill RPG player and clear mind. RPG player lets the user experience the world from a third-person perspective, and clear mind helps him stay calm in life-threatening situations. That's also why mental spells don't affect him. He also enjoys the thrill and seems more like an adrenaline junkie with how he seeks out danger for himself. He is practically living his life as if he is playing an RPG game. He quickly becomes overpowered after becoming a spirit user and obtaining the destiny transformation and synchronization magic. He practically turns into a weapon of mass destruction. He has an almost fanatical level of faith in the goddess Noah. But don't misunderstand. He doesn't exactly love her. He is just servile towards her to an extreme level. Some people may think of the goddess Noah as a love interest, but as far as I can see, it's just a platonic relationship. The character interactions are generally good, though they become a bit repetitive by the end of the story. The side characters are also quite unique in their attitude towards the protagonist. Yes, there are some people who make fun of him for being weak, but no one goes out of their way to bully him, like we see in other novels of this genre. The protagonist does feel a bit sore about it, but it isn't at the level where he feels the need to think of them as enemies and take revenge. Also, he has proper friends who look out for him, so most of his classmates are quite reasonable. The plot of the story has well defined arcs, with properly foreshadowed twists and a couple of really interesting developments. The pacing of the story is great at the beginning, though it gets progressively worse in the later arcs. Though it never really gets bad, it just gets kind of annoying because of all the cheesy comedy. Now for the bad parts. In fact, I have many problems with this light novel. The first one being, why did the author decide to make the protagonist a static character? Why isn't he allowed to grow in any way by the plot? While almost all of his classmates were getting at least some amount of character developments, the protagonist stays more or less the same, a socially awkward virgin who can't read the mood and gets pushed around by all the women around him. He is extremely dense and indecisive when it comes to relationships, and he remains that way even after several years of adventuring and becoming so overpowered that he is able to fight with the strongest of enemies, even demigods. His herbivore personality sometimes makes it painful to keep reading his interactions with other characters. The second problem is the author's insistence on keeping the protagonist a virgin, while most of his other classmates were allowed to have sex. I would have no trouble at all if all the characters in this novel were asexual, but they are far from that. For example, the hero of light, who is a childhood friend of the protagonist, is practically treated as a stud horse, which he agrees to, by the way. He marries more than 20 women and spends the night with a different woman each night. So that's quite intense. I don't appreciate the author deliberately forcing the protagonist to stay as a virgin, even though there are girls practically throwing themselves at him. To make the matters worse, the protagonist is also a closet pervert. He will stare, touch boobs, and sometimes kiss unintentionally. But he ends up getting cock-blocked some way or another. This becomes a running joke throughout the entire novel. I know that the author is doing this because they think that it's good comedy, but it's really not that funny. At one point, it becomes a constant stream of the author just blueballing the protagonist every chance they get. It's like they are going out of their way to forcefully add unnecessary comedy into the plot. I don't find it funny when the authors force the plot. It disrupts the overall immersion of the story. Anyways, as I've said before, I will never get the Japanese sense of humor. My third problem is the overinflated harem. There are girls falling for him left and right, but as he is extremely dense, he doesn't notice their blatant show of affection and aggressive sexual advances. Even if they tell him straight to his face that they love him, he neither accepts or rejects them. He just decides to ignore the entire thing, or the author just forcefully makes it that way. All this just ends up adding unnecessary drama into the story. The romantic interactions between the protagonist and the love interest may be quite well written, but unfortunately they ultimately lead to nowhere, at least during the entire main story. The two starting love interests have it the worst, as after a time skip arc, they stop being characters with their own motivations and become reduced to mere comedy punchlines. I think at some point they become closer to each other more than they are with the protagonist himself. And it's more or less the same with the rest of the love interests. And yes, the author also introduces a trap character, and he is considered a semi-love interest. You just have to take that with a grain of salt. Most importantly, the personality of the love interests are far from being delightful. I feel that the protagonist would fare better alone playing his RPG games rather than having them as his partners. Spending days with them would be exhausting. This is the first story that managed to make me feel this way about the love interest of a novel. I guess that's an achievement in itself. Honestly, I feel that the harem is totally unnecessary. It has more demerits for the story than merits. My fourth problem is the story arc about time travel. It's kind of foreshadowed from the start that the protagonist might have some prior connection with the various kingdoms and important characters in the other world. Later in the story, it becomes clear when the protagonist has to travel to the past in order to save the world. Now, that is where the confusion begins. It's revealed that after saving the world, the protagonist has been in cryosleep the entire time, even before the event where he was summoned from the other world. So that would mean that there were always two Takasuki Makoto present in the same timeline. So that creates a question. Is the storyline after the time travel arc an alternate timeline? If the history of the world had changed so much, then what happened to the past storyline? For example, if the moon country after the time travel arc is developed by Vιουργι̗ι̗, then what happened to the past moon country before the time travel arc? Did the storyline just vanish? Then wouldn't that make the time travel arc impossible and impractical? The author doesn't explain a thing, and it becomes very confusing. They don't seem to have any concept of butterfly effect. The fifth problem is the inconsistency in the mood of the story. The story seemingly has a serious and dark premise, as it tries to paint the horrors of dungeons through frequent deaths. Yet the author throws around comedy punchline at every chance they get. It sometimes seems really serious, but the vibe is ruined through the constant use of cheesy comedy. It would be alright if he was skilled enough to create a balance between the two, but unfortunately he fails to do that, resulting in severe inconsistencies in the overall mood of the story. There is not much world building as the story mainly focuses on the protagonist, the things he does, and the places he goes to. Initially, it seems like this is a world with its own set of metaphysics and religions, and the various goddesses are responsible for maintaining it. However, later it's revealed that the goddesses are actually responsible for governing the entire universe, parallel universes, and the branching timelines. Now, it seems that they were far greater than we had initially thought. Yet, they are having so much trouble with just one tiny conflict on this one tiny world. Furthermore, despite them all being millions of years old, they seem to act like just immature teenagers. And last but not least, there are no details of the power levels of the characters, and their leveling system is also not clearly explained. I kind of feel like that the author is probably just trying out different things and playing with a few ideas. I just hope that the best of them end up in the light novel version. To sum up, this is a classic example of a web novel with a pretty good ending, going a bit stale at the end. If the author wants to make the light novel version a bit more readable, then they have a lot of work to do. It can be fixed with just some small changes. Now about the light novel version. As of volume 4, there haven't been that many differences from the web novel version. If I had to say, then the most major change is that the author introduces the love interest Vιουργι̗ι̗ a bit later than the web novel version. Anyways, I just want to see how the author handles the time travel problem. It would be really quite interesting how he manages to mend all the flaws. I'll be keeping an eye on the future volumes of this light novel, and I will try to do some update videos when the time is right. So that's all for this review. If you like my work, please like, comment, share, and please subscribe to the channel. Stay safe and healthy till we meet in the next video. Thank you.